4 astronauts just went around the moon and came back alive. The Artemis II fell in the sea with protective shield capsule. It happened first time in more than 50 years, and successful landing of Apollo 2 was the trigger. The 4 astronauts spent 10 days in deep space, a loop around the far side of the moon, a record-breaking distance of 252,756 miles from Earth, farther than Apollo 13. A total solar eclipse seen from beyond the moon that lasted nearly 54 minutes. And then the most violent 6 minutes of the entire mission. They hit Earth's atmosphere at Mach 33, around 25,000 miles per hour. Plasma wrapped around Orion at temperatures near 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Communications went silent. 4 Gs crushed them into their seats, then splashed down at 8:07 p.m. Eastern, almost 2,000 miles downrange off San Diego. Every parachute opened. Every system worked. They walked off the helicopter under their own power. On the surface, it looked nearly flawless. It wasn't. The heat shield came back with divots, cracks, uneven ablation. The same issue that showed up during Artemis I in 2022. Back then, chunks of charred material broke away in ways engineers did not predict. The capsule stayed within thermal limits, but the data did not match the models. That makes engineers nervous. For Artemis II, NASA adjusted the re-entry profile. They shortened the skip distance to limit time spent in the most damaging temperature range. It worked well enough to bring the crew home safely, but the damage pattern is still there. Divers photographed it within minutes of splashdown. Aircraft tracked the thermal signature during descent. Now NASA faces a hard call. The redesigned AVCOAT heat shield formulation is already being built into Artemis III and IV. Do they certify it using Artemis I and II data alone, or do they need another uncrewed test? That single decision reshapes the entire timeline. And the timeline is brutal. The gap between Artemis II and the next flight is roughly 15 months. But here is where things get interesting. Artemis III is not what most people think anymore. For years, Artemis III was supposed to be the big lunar landing. 2 astronauts descending to the South Pole aboard SpaceX's Starship human landing system. A week on the surface. A 30-day mission. The first human landing since 1972. That plan is gone. Artemis III has been pulled forward to mid-2027. But it is staying in Earth orbit. No moon, no landing. Instead, it becomes a high-stakes dress rehearsal. 4 astronauts will launch on the Space Launch System aboard Orion and rendezvous in low Earth orbit with 1 or possibly 2 commercial lunar landers. SpaceX's Starship HLS, Blue Origin's Blue Moon. Both launched separately. Both never flown with humans. The crew will enter the landers, test propulsion, evaluate life support, check communications, and for the first time, wear the new Axiom extravehicular mobility unit suits that future moonwalkers will rely on. Think Apollo 9 in 1969. No landing, no glory, but without it, Apollo 11 never happens. Right now, NASA has not even finalized whether Artemis III will dock with 1 lander or both, or whether it will operate in low Earth orbit or a higher orbit to simulate lunar thermal conditions. Those decisions depend on how fast SpaceX and Blue Origin can move. And SpaceX has a mountain to climb. Starship HLS must reach orbit and then be refueled by at least 14 separate tanker flights. 14. Each one another Starship. All feeding liquid methane and liquid oxygen into a propellant depot that does not yet exist. Orbital fuel transfer at this scale has never been done with crew-rated systems. Then the fully loaded lander has to boost to meet Orion. 10 years ago, this would have sounded impossible. It might still be. Blue Origin's Blue Moon is smaller and more conventional, but it also has never flown with crew. Both companies must complete uncrewed lunar landing demonstrations before NASA allows astronauts on board. A report from NASA's Office of Inspector General warned that those demos may not fully represent the final crewed configuration, meaning the first true test could be the real mission. If neither lander is ready, Artemis III becomes just another Orion flight. That would be a serious setback. Assume they succeed. Then comes Artemis IV in early 2028. The first crewed lunar landing in 56 years. 4 astronauts launch on SLS and Orion. A commercial lander waits in lunar orbit, placed there separately. Orion docks. 2 astronauts transfer. They descend to the South Pole, not the flat equatorial plains of Apollo. The South Pole is extreme, permanently shadowed craters, temperatures dropping to minus 390 degrees Fahrenheit, regions that have not seen sunlight in billions of years. Orbital data from missions like the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter suggest water ice trapped in those shadows. Water changes everything. Drinking water, oxygen, and when you split it, hydrogen and oxygen for rocket fuel. The moon becomes a refueling station. NASA has identified 9 candidate landing regions near the pole, all rougher and more complex than any Apollo site. The surface crew will spend about a week there. At least 2 spacewalks in the new Axiom suits. Deployment of a lunar environment monitoring station to study the moon's interior. Samples from terrain no human has ever touched. The mission lasts about 30 days. Apollo's longest surface stay was 3 days. This is a different level. Then Artemis V, targeted for late 2028. This is where it stops being flags and footprints and starts becoming infrastructure. Another crewed landing. A rover delivered in advance. Astronauts driving across the South Pole for the first time since Apollo 17. Interacting with cargo delivered under NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services program. Activating systems. Connecting modules. Verifying that robotic deliveries are where they should be and working as designed. This is the beginning of a base. Phase 1 is build, test, learn, send hardware. See what breaks. Fix it. Phase 2 adds semi-habitable shelters and extended duration systems. Phase 3 aims for sustained presence. Rotating crews. Weeks or months on the surface. Target 2032. NASA envisions power systems that survive the 14-day lunar night. Possibly a small nuclear reactor on the surface. Roughly 10,000 times less powerful than a terrestrial plant, but compact enough to fit in a car. Solar when possible. Nuclear when it is pitch black. They plan to use lunar regolith for 3D printing structures, extract oxygen and water directly from the soil. The moon stops being a destination and becomes an industrial platform. The Lunar Gateway space station in orbit around the moon, canceled in 2026. The focus shifted to the surface. Dirt over orbit. The space launch system almost died too. A 2025 budget proposal called for canceling SLS and Orion after Artemis III, citing roughly $4 billion per launch. Funding survived in legislation passed on July 4, 2025. But the message was clear. This program lives on thin political ice. And there is another clock ticking. China has already landed robotic missions on the far side of the moon and returned samples. Their goal is a crewed lunar landing by 2030, followed by a base. If NASA holds its schedule, American astronauts land about 2 years earlier. If Artemis slips, that gap disappears. Nothing about this plan is guaranteed. The heat shield must be certified. The service module valve redesign must work. The toilet that malfunctioned during Artemis II needs fixing. SpaceX must master large-scale orbital refueling. Blue Origin must prove its lander. The Axiom suits must perform in conditions that cannot be fully simulated on Earth. Congress must continue writing the checks. Every link in the chain has to hold. But here is what changed. Artemis II proved Orion can keep 4 humans alive in deep space for 10 days. It proved the European-built service module can power nearly 700,000 miles of round-trip travel. It proved SLS can send crew toward the moon and bring them home. It proved the heat shield, even imperfect, can survive lunar velocity with people inside. 2 weeks ago, none of that was proven with a crew on board. Now it is. 15 months from now, another crew climbs into Orion. They stay in Earth orbit. They practice docking. It may not trend. It may not break records. But it is the mission that decides whether boots touch lunar regolith again. After that, the landings begin. one after another. Power systems, rovers, habitats, a reactor, the skeleton of the first permanent human outpost beyond Earth. The race back to the moon has been running quietly for years. What changed is this. The capsule is home, the crew is safe, the data is in, the next rocket is already being stacked. Getting back to the moon is no longer the question. Staying there is.